everyone, and welcome to Nothing Venture, Nothing Game. As always, I'm your host with the most, your GM, Jared, and today I'm joined by Rules Arbiter, Steve.
Yep.
And we are diving into the Ranger class in the upcoming Pathfinder Player Core, or the remaster of the Ranger class. They put out a recent blog post by Mike Sayer over at Paizo. You can check out the links below to go right to the actual blog, but we're going to kind of go over what's going on, what they talked about, and then just kind of how we see this class playing out. Now, just so everyone's aware, if you're in the future, the player core comes out around mid-November. They're saying around November 15th, while if you're listening to this week and it's still in October, it hasn't come out yet. So yes, but with that being said, I have to do this. YouTube, they sent their goons over and they were like, hey, you're not saying it early enough in your YouTube videos like everyone else, and you're kind of throwing it in the mix. So if you like what we're doing here at Nothing Venture, Nothing Game, please give us a like and subscribe. And as always, if you really, really like what we do, share it with your friends. But if you hate what we do, share it with your enemies. That's the most important part. Just share it with your enemies. But yeah. So talking about the Ranger. Now, we've actually had Steve and I GM'd in the campaign, and Steve got to play alongside a player who was playing the Ranger class, and they really liked it. The Ranger class early on had a lot to it. Now Paizo went back and they kind of looked at the things that they liked, the things that they didn't like, and the things the community really liked. And a number of things kind of jumped out. One, the community liked the magic that was brought to the Ranger class. Originally, it was called Warden Spells, and I believe
they're keeping it. I think
they're keeping. Yeah. Originally, Ranger spells were called Warden Spells, and they were added way later.
Yeah, they came out in the Advanced Player's Guide, and one of the things that they're having a benefit on when they're coming out with this as the remaster is they get to collate all this data for multiple books, at least kind of the first few books, and push it all into, and that's all integrated now into the one class, which is going to happen, I surmise, to a lot of the classes. Like the Barbarian Instincts going to get pulled over into all the one entry of the Barbarian, and in the Ranger they make mention that they're pulling over that focus spell magic, which wasn't originally part of the Ranger, We're all rolling into one with the new remaster.
Yep. They say basically with Ranger expertise and Masterful Hunter, naturally progressing the Ranger spellcasting proficiency all the way up to Master. So that's going to be, like Steve said, it's going to be one, it's now going to be core to the class. So magic's going to be core to the Ranger class. I have something to say about that. I'll wait till later, but it's just my own personal gripe. Second thing they...
Well, the one thing that for me is like, I mean, I played Rangers way back in like the 3rd edition days, and almost like to a little bit of 2nd edition, but I didn't really play Ranger. But for the like 3rd edition days, and like Magic was an integral part of Ranger, so I actually like the fact that they're bringing that back from like the old version of what Rangers used to be, like effectively a mix between a martial character or like a fighter, and mixing it a little bit in Druid. So they get a little bit of the magic of the Druid, they get a little bit of martial prowess, but they all have their own take on it, like the two-weapon fighting and their bow usage and all that stuff. So I actually enjoy that they're like almost bringing magic back to the Ranger as a core mechanic.
I have beef with magic with Rangers. Steve does it perfectly. Steve always says it the best. He says the wizard fighter is the Magus and the Druid fighter is the Ranger. Effectively because of that. I like my Rangers like Strider or Aragon from Lord of the Rings, but that's just me. Everyone has their preferences. And then the nice thing is you can play the class any way you like. So the second thing they do touch on, and me and Steve were actually just having a whole conversation on this, was Paizo is now decided to remove Ranger snares from it, and they basically identified with like all their testing and player feedback and just people playing in general that this was the least used available option for Rangers. Now, originally Rangers had the ability to like come up with snares as they played, and the way snares were created, they were very the best word is bonk. They just didn't work properly. And Steve kind of knows more on this because he went into a little bit of like down the rabbit hole on snares and stuff.
Yeah, snares are not fun. And I'm trying to find this spot. Here we go, right here. We're going to highlight this part right here. Ranger snares are going to be the first thing not appearing in the player core that they were originally. So there was an option for Rangers to be good at snares. I believe it was a class feat, or it was one of their options that they get to choose at level 1, that they were the least satisfying of the options available. They don't go into why. I have in my brain places reasons why it's not fun, because snares imply you're setting up an ambush. Now, players would love to set up an ambush, but the problem with snares and setting up an ambush is you have to have the enemy come to you. And most places, the players are the driving force of the adventure. They're going to stop something. They're more like basically the Avengers or the Justice League. They're not having people attack them for the most part. They're having to go out and stop the bad guy. So the bad guy's going on doing something. And yes, there are chances where you can make die rolls and you know a patrol is coming, but that's the exception, not the rule. So we have a whole class set up that you go, oh man, I'm good at snares, and you just never get to use it. And I think that's the major reason why it was never an option that most people pick, because the players are the aggressors for the most part. Maybe not aggressive in a negative way, but they're always going to attack the bad guy. They're going to the bad guy. So it leaves that option very weak.
Yes, I concur with my fellow Pathfinder player, Steve. Especially when you're playing this class, and one of the larger aspects of Pathfinder and Paizo is Pathfinder Society. In Society, it's a 4-hour session. So you sit down and you start playing, and the premise is go here, do this. It's A and B. Now, yes, if we've all played Society, sometimes if you're part of a specific group, you might have like a submission. It's like, go here, oh, you're part of this group, find this book, but also defeat the Lich, or, stop the cultist, or whatever. There's no point in time during that 4-hour session, like Steve said, where we're the hunters, right? We're going in. I'm not going to have that 10 minutes or the hour to set up the snare, because we're kicking indoors. It's rough to say, but that's what we're doing. Or we're on the ship and the ship is sinking, or whatever you want to say. But we're moving forward. The story is moving forward. And like Steve said, we were talking about this. I made reference to Monster Hunter. I loved Monster Hunter. I'm a big Monster Hunter fan. One of the aspects of Monster Hunter is you get traps, and then you put them down, and it's like a little thing. Your character does like a motion, trap gets set, and then you lure the monster to the trap, and then it goes off. But it's like it's seconds. And Steve said, like, he mentioned Diablo. He said, oh, what would be cool, like in Diablo, your character throws down the trap, and then the trap's there, and then the monsters and enemies have to avoid it. And then we said, yeah, like it is video gamey, right? Like it has that video game concept behind it, but maybe that's what they should start leaning into, is that concept of like having these snares be very fast, and boom, snares dropped. Now we're in the mix. The kobolds are running. I throw down my snare, and it goes off, and the acid trap goes off, and all of a sudden the kobold's like, I'm melting.
Even to the point where if you deal with intelligent enemies, and they're going to see you put down the trap, and obviously they're not going to step on the trap, but that adds area denial to the game, where you're going to say, no, you can't come here. You have to walk around my traps, and you have to now deal with the traps and remember where they are, and then, work around them. It also adds a point where those martial characters and those other, so even spellcasters, would have the ability to move people on the battlefield, use that forced movement rule, where they just shove people, or they can have a spell push people. You can start using those moves to push people into traps. And it really adds more of a group aesthetic, where like, okay, no, you put down that thunder trap or whatever, and I was able to, as my barbarian or a fighter or even my wizard, hydraulic pushing someone into a trap. I think it's a really cool concept. So we haven't seen what they're doing with snares. We know that they've I can't speak. They took it out for the moment, and they're going to reevaluate it and add it in at some point.
Yeah, my assumption is it will probably come out in the Player Core 2, which is
possible.
the second half of this book, this release, right? So just so everyone's aware, in the Player Core 1, certain classes aren't going to be there. So if you're a fan of the Champion class, it won't be there because they're retooling a lot of stuff. And one of the things they do talk about is the Champion class needed the biggest retooling of everything else because of the way they're changing everything due to the OGL. So that's the second part of this blog. And now kind of the third part, they talk about rules and how the game rules interacted weirdly with how the game is played. And one of the big aspects to that was they bring it up here, which is the warden's reload. Right, Steve? That was I'm sorry. The crossbow ace and the stuff like that.
Yeah. All right. So Paizo has taken feedback from obviously the players, especially they're getting numbers from society, and obviously they're perusing their forums, and they're getting feedback from them. And basically, some of the players were feeling that there were some feats that felt like taxes. Now, people who play 3rd edition know what this means, is that there's sometimes feat taxes. Well, I have to take this feat that I don't necessarily care about, but this feat gives me access to this feat. Or a feat is so good that not taking it is such a detriment that it's like, what are you doing? You need to take that feat because it changes the game. And that's what they felt with the crossbow ace, which is they're mentioning right here, where the crossbow ace feat was just too good. And a couple of things it did is it took effectively at the time that they came out with that feat, all the crossbows at the time that they came out were all simple weapons. So the crossbow ace feat effectively made them all martial level damage. It's really what it did. So they were treated as martial weapons, even though they were simple weapons, because they upped their damage. But the problem with it is it didn't really work unless you reloaded your crossbow. So if you're entering combat with a loaded crossbow and you're hunting down your enemy using your tracking, your survival, all your bonuses to your skills, that was what ranges are kind of designed to do, you couldn't use your crossbow ace feat because you haven't reloaded yet. So a lot of these things kind of interact where it's like the game expected you to play one way and then told you get penalized for it. So they tried to clean that up to where these things didn't hurt you. I mean, it showed you like, hey, this is the gameplay loop we expect, and then now we're not going to punish you for it. So they came out with, we have a image here, which I'm going to make bigger because I don't know why it's so small.
So small.
Here they came out with a list of the ranged weapon from this is the new list of ranged weapons, and you're going to notice right here it's going to say Arbalist under martial weapons. So they now have a martial crossbow. So now if you don't necessarily want that feat, you can just take the martial crossbow and it's going to do the list of damage. It's going to do D10 damage. They came out with a new group called Crossbows. Now, bows and crossbows are now separate, which we're going to get to that in a second. But they came out with a new crossbow weapon group, and it also has Backstabber and a couple of new things. Actually, Jared was telling me before, a couple of new weapons are getting Backstabber, which is really cool. So now you don't have to get taxed by that feat. If you just want a little bit more damage, just take the Arbalist, and I'm assuming that they may have even more crossbows coming, but so now we don't have to use that feat, and now the game, doesn't have to tax me the feat. It doesn't have to tax me having a reload to get a little bit of bonus damage.
Now, going back to what Steve said earlier, another aspect that they talked about a lot is crossbows and how crossbows didn't feel separate, right? Like they just kind of felt like they tacked them on, and they looked at that and they said, no, we don't want that. We want to change it. So like Steve brought up that image, and you could see there's now a new section called crossbow. And then when you get the specialization for crossbow, you now do persistent bleed damage as your specialty, right? So we all know how weapons work in the game. When you get a specialization in a weapon, they all kind of do something behind the scenes whenever you do a critical success. So crossbows now do persistent bleed damage, which is awesome when you're not fighting undead things, because I think a lot of times, or oozes, maybe. Things that are going to be immune or resistant to physical damage is going to look. Not every critical specialization is going to work in every situation, because I believe maces stun, and there are certain monsters that are just immune to stun. Yeah.
So there are opportunities where this won't work, and there's opportunities that will work great. The fact that it's persistent damage is amazing, because persistent damage, besides magical healing, there's really only one way to get rid of persistent damage: is roll your flat check and get a 15 or better.
Yeah, and hope for the best.
Yeah, or medicine checks. Or there's a way of medicine checks to help that. But persistent damage could last. I mean, it could be quite a bit of damage. People, I think, underestimate persistent damage. So I think persistent damage would be, there's times where, like, you say, hey, your DM, that goblin's supposed to roll his persistent damage, and he rolls a 1 for damage. Oh, crap. And then he makes his check. But there are times where that's going to be 2, 3, 4 rounds of D8 damage that you don't have to roll anything. It just happens.
So like we were saying, there are also other things that like people might feel like they missed out, which is the bow specialization. Remember, we talked about specializations. The bow specialization did what again, Steve? Sorry, Steve has it.
Yeah, that's okay. The bow specialization, if you have a critical specialization with the bow and you crit with the bow, it pins the target to the ground.
Oh, so you mobilize them effectively.
Yes.
You mobilize them, and then they have to spend an action to yank it out of however you pin them to the ground. Because we've had that. It's like, oh, it's a flying head. Well, I pin it to the ground. I don't. So now you can use a rune. I believe it's the Grievous rune, right, Steve?
Yes.
The Grievous rune gives that feature, the pinning feature from the bow specialization. But also keep in mind, the bows still have that specialization. They're not removing that specialization. They're just saying they're also adding in this rune to kind of give the crossbows, if you really loved the whole pinning concept. But now that's just grimy, because now you can pin someone to the ground while they're bleeding out.
While they're bleeding,
yeah, that's just rough. That's just rough in general.
Just stand there and bleed.
Yeah. I like it a lot. I mean, we've all seen the Blade movies, right? Where he like shoots the guy.
He gets stuck to the wall.
Yeah, he sticks him to the wall. Yeah. Now I have to make a vampire hunter. And then lastly, they kind of just talk about how like this was the stuff that they really wanted to touch on and convert things. They talked about how they wanted to really emphasize the crossbows and the bows and kind of like split them apart. Anything else I'm missing here, Steve?
No, they just mentioned that they retooled, since they're making the change to the way the feats and the way they work. Obviously, Crossbow Ace required you to reload, so they're actually retooling Crossbow Ace, and well, that's really big. They're actually retooling Crossbow Ace. This is going to be the new version of Crossbow Ace you see on your screen here. So obviously wielding a crossbow with reload 1 or higher, you have a deep understanding of crossbows that allow you to reload efficiently while you're moving yourself out of the line of return fire. Either create a diversion or take cover, then interact to reload. As normal, you must meet requirements for taking cover, which explains there. What this is doing is taking the idea of a lot of the stuff that we got from Gunslinger, where we're modifying our reload to let us reload and then do something, or do something and then reload. That wasn't really available. What didn't exist when the Ranger first came out. So now we're taking some of the stuff that they learned from the Gunslinger and adding it into, since the Crossbow Ace, they fixed that problem by coming out with a martial crossbow. So if you wanted the martial crossbow damage, you would just take the martial crossbow. And then now, since the Crossbow Ace feat doesn't really work because you don't need the feat anymore, they retooled it to give you an opportunity to reload for one action and then do something else as well as reloading.
And also they don't really touch on anything other besides kind of like reworking how feats work with each other and removing the feat taxes, a lot of those feat taxes and snares. But also they don't touch on the kind of like the flurry, the precision aspects of the Ranger class. So I'm assuming those are still going to be there. Remember, when you choose your Ranger and you're building your Ranger, you could choose a specialization. So it's like, oh, flurry is multiple attack penalty. It lowers your multiple attack penalty. Precision, you deal a D8 on your first attack, I believe. And then there was like outwit, which gave you bonuses to
the skills.
Deception. Skills. They don't really touch on those.
They do and they don't. They don't list them specifically because they kind of open up the blog post with basically saying the Ranger was in a relatively good spot at launch of the game, and it just got better as they added more and more options to it. But they said that just because it was in a very good place doesn't mean they're not going to change anything, and they're not going to improve what wasn't working. But a lot of the things that the Rangers were doing, people already enjoy, and they were, for the most part, was in line with what they wanted the Ranger to be able to do. So Jared's probably right on this, where we're most likely not going to see a change, or at least a drastic change, to the things that people already like doing with the Ranger in the game that kind of enticed them to do, which is to do the more damage or attack multiple times with no or virtually no penalty, or very low penalty. I want to see if they change Outwit. I have a funny feeling that people undervalue Outwit, because I think it's really powerful. They can get those skill checks, and it's more of like a support feature. But yeah. I think that them saying that Ranger was in a really good spot kind of gives, if you read between the lines, it kind of says that we may not be changing a lot of things that were already working. We're just changing the stuff that wasn't. Yeah.
All right, so that's really a wrap on today's discussion about the remastered Ranger class. Be sure to let us know what you think about the remasters coming out. So far, we've touched on Wizard, spellcasting, and now Ranger. So there's only maybe 4 more weeks left before the actual hardbound book drops. They haven't changed the date on their website, but we'll see, right? So it's about a month away. So yeah, let us know in the comments down below what you feel, how you feel about this, what you think about the remaster. Are you getting it? Are you just going to stick with what you already have? All that jazz. So as usual, I want to say thank you very much to Steve, Rules Arbiter Steve, for hanging out with us. And yeah, we are Nothing Venture, Nothing Game. We love rolling dice, giving advice with a little bit of that New York spice. Say goodbye.
Later.